limo driver was the one behind the wheel minutes after a beating at a Las Vegas Strip nightclub.
Indicted Kamara, Lamons, and those two other men, including the one you see there in the front seat.
The one thing I always want to say is there's always two sides of the story.
One of the biggest storylines in the NFL for the past year and a half has officially been resolved today. And I'm gonna admit to you guys that I'm extremely shocked at the result. So before we get to the content, this video is probably gonna get demonetized. So if you could drop a like just to support the channel and the algorithm despite the demonetization, that'd be great. Now that we get all that out of the way, work! The NFL and NBA season are officially over, and I need something to hold me over until at least the NFL season comes back. So I've been playing prize picks for the WNBA and the MLB, and I've been fairly successful. It's a good way to get some extra action on games that I wouldn't really watch otherwise. I post my picks onto my Instagram story daily, and I've been hitting on a decent amount of them. And right now, when you use my promo code Mikerophone, they'll double your deposit up to $100. Mic check 1 2 1 2. What's going on, everybody? The Alvin Kamara situation has officially reached its resolution. Now, this has been something that's been going on for quite literally a year and a half. It started the night before the 2022 Pro Bowl, where there was a report that Saints running back Alvin Kamara was arrested on the day of the Pro Bowl and released on a $5,000 bond after being charged with battery resulting in substantial bodily harm. Detectives obtained surveillance footage from the casino that matched the victim's account of events. According to the police report, Kamara pushed the victim and another male in the group punched the victim in the face and knocked him against the wall. Kamara then punched the victim several times. 3 other humans in the group joined in, stomping on the victim's face, chest, and legs. The victim, who was knocked unconscious, had an orbital fracture to his right eye and other minor injuries, according to the police report. The fight was broken up by security officers. Kamara and his group were then escorted out. The incident occurred around 6:25 a.m. on Saturday, the eve of the Pro Bowl, at Dre's After Dark Club in the Cromwell Casino. The report was made that Saturday at a local hospital, which officers were dispatched to around 5:50 p.m. Pacific time. Kamara was arrested on Sunday, 3:30 Pacific time, after the Pro Bowl, which he played in, which I thought was comical. I mean, literally, they had policemen waiting in the stadium to arrest Alvin Kamara for the moment that the Pro Bowl concluded. Now, the victim was only able to describe one of the 4 men in his interview, but Kamara was identified by surveillance footage and an internet search comparing tattoos and photos to the man in the picture. Another man in the group was identified via his social media account that tagged Kamara in photos of the group at Dre's that night. Kamara was interviewed by detectives inside Allegiant Stadium after the Pro Bowl. Kamara said that the victim called one of the members of his group ugly and that the victim said, "I'll whoop." Kamara told detectives that he saw a fight break out next to him and saw the victim get punched, then punched him as well because he thought he was running away. Kamara said he did not know if he punched the victim while the victim was on the ground. Now here's where things would get really interesting, and I said this in our very first video on the subject about a year and a half ago. There's gonna be footage coming out. When you're fighting in the middle of a Las Vegas hotel, bro, there's security cameras everywhere. I mean, we're talking about a Las Vegas hotel and casino. They're trying to keep an eye out for any foul play, potentially for any people that are cheating while playing games, potentially people that get way too intoxicated and start a fight, and things of that nature. And boy, it seems like as time went on, things would get very interesting. About a week later, we would find out that 2 more suspects were arrested in the Alvin Kamara incident. The 2 additional suspects were Darren Young and Percy Harris, who turned themselves in after warrants were issued. Each was charged with battery resulting in substantial bodily harm, which is the same felony charge that Kamara faced. Now, the police report states that Kamara punched the alleged victim 8 times, with 3 of the punches coming when the man was on the ground. Other men that Kamara was with, likely Young and Harris, also allegedly assaulted the victim. Police reviewed surveillance video that they say shows Kamara putting his arm out to stop the victim from getting in an elevator before the fight broke out. And yes, you best believe we actually have footage of this. As time went on, things would look really bad for Alvin Kamara. Darnell Green is the name of the victim. Images would be put out to show how graphic the damage was. We'll post it onto our Instagram because, well, I just don't think we could really post this type of content on YouTube without this potentially getting taken down. And eventually an investigation would get launched. Now, what was really interesting about this is, despite an investigation being launched, and despite the NFL having a huge reputation for being very harsh when it comes to punishment, even if it's on its league superstars, Alvin Kamara faced no punishment at all whatsoever. Which I'm not here to say,
NFL, how could you not punish Alvin Kamara?
or to say that it's a little surprising. Bear in mind, this was happening at the same exact time that Deshaun Watson's situation was going on. Maybe the NFL was more focused on handling that properly. I'm not necessarily sure. But Adam Schefter said that there's a real chance that the status of his case was not going to affect his ability at all this season.
So if we're talking about Alvin Kamara from a fantasy standpoint, there's a real chance, Field, that the status of that case is not going to affect his availability this season. Now, at some point in time, depending on what the investigation shows, yes, he could be disciplined. But in terms of this season, his attorneys keep pushing out the case. It keeps being pushed back. And by the time that there's resolution to it, this season may well be underway, and Alvin Kamara may be on the field for the majority, if not all, of this season.
Shefty was right. Alvin Kamara would play in the entire 2022 season. But throughout the season, we would get additional updates on Alvin Kamara. So again, very atypical. I'm not the type of person that's going to sit here and say,
hey, this man's punishment wasn't harsh enough.
It just, when you look at all the evidence that's brought forth, it really looks like Alvin Kamara could be in huge trouble in this particular instance. I mean, one, there's an image of Darnell Green's face being rearranged. Two, there is copious amounts of video surveillance footage that was released during the season that made Alvin Kamara look really, really bad. I mean, it seemed very clear that Alvin Kamara was involved in this situation. And it's not like one clip that barely shows Alvin Kamara being involved. It's multiple clips from different angles that show Alvin Kamara being involved in beating the living crap out of Darnell Green. Originally, my thought was, what the hell is going to happen to Kamara? Because this is very incriminating. I mean, the man was quite literally not caught in 4K because obviously the footage doesn't necessarily represent the highest quality, but you can tell that the footage clearly represents Alvin Kamara beating the crap out of this guy. The guy's face looked really, really bad, and ultimately he decided to file a civil suit as a result of that, and rightfully so, because he had a lot of evidence that could potentially get him a large payday, I suppose. But bear in mind, whenever you file a civil lawsuit, your goal isn't to get the human being incarcerated. Your goal is more to try to make out of the situation with a bag. So Darnell Green would do just that. You would file a civil suit against Alvin Kamara over the alleged February attack. In this lawsuit, he actually attacked the NFL as well. The lawsuit filed in Orleans Parish by Darnell Green Jr. alleges that Kamara and the other men involved beat Green and stomped on him when he was on the floor unconscious outside of a Las Vegas nightclub on the morning of February 5th prior to the Pro Bowl. It alleges that Kamara shoved Green into a wall, repeatedly punched him in the face, including after he had fallen to the ground, and bragged about the assault to a friend as they were leaving the club. Green's lawsuit asks for a jury trial and compensatory and punitive damages of no less than $10 million. It seeks $5 million in actual damages for pecuniary losses, pain and suffering, disfigurement, mental anguish, and past, present, and future medical expenses, and $5 million in exemplary damages. The lawsuit states that Green sustained severe injuries to his neck, back, head, shoulder, knees, and face. It says medical testing confirmed a disfiguring facial fracture to Green's right orbital bone, blunt force trauma to his head, multiple disc protrusions, and structural tears in his shoulder. The lawsuit, which includes alleged photos from the nightclub security camera, says Green had to go to the hospital because of his injuries and will need multiple surgeries as a result. Green also accuses the NFL of not doing enough to punish Kamara, saying in the lawsuit that Kamara currently faces criminal charges for the occurrence described herein. However, these proceedings have seemingly been put on hold to allow Kamara to play an entire season for the Saints without being suspended. Furthermore, NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell has failed to fully investigate the incident at hand and is ostensibly waiting for the criminal proceedings to play out before issuing a suspension. It is highly suspected that Goodell has seen the security footage of the incident just as the plaintiff has, but is choosing not to take corrective action. Darnell Green refuses to allow the commissioner, the authorities, or Kamara himself to sweep sweep this matter under the rug. Green is represented by Houston attorney Tony Busby. Man, that's a name I haven't heard in a while. Tony Busby is quite literally involved in almost each and every lawsuit versus any type of athlete, whether it being Deshaun Watson, Miles Bridges in the NBA, and in this case, Darnell Green. Go get your bag, Tony. Who am I to judge? Someone has to represent the victims, am I right? So the reason why I summarized each and every detail of this story for you guys is the following part of this was obviously Kamara would get indicted. And I thought it looked really bad for Alvin Kamara, but this entire situation, this entire process was a little fishy in the sense that it didn't get the attention that you think it would. Kamara wasn't punished by the NFL the way that Roger Goodell is notorious for punishing his athletes. We're talking about a man that suspended Ezekiel Elliott for 6 games in 2017 for his incident. I don't want to go into that. He appealed Deshaun Watson's suspension after choosing an impartial judge to move it from 4 games to 12 games. And now when you hear the result of this, it's all the more shocking. Alvin Kamara reached a plea deal on July 11. And here's what the article says. A plea deal has been agreed upon in the case against New Orleans running back Alvin Kamara after he was allegedly part of the beating of a man outside of a Las Vegas Strip nightclub. Kamara pleaded no contest to a misdemeanor charge of breach of peace. He'll do 30 hours of community service and pay more than $100,000 to the victim for hospital bills. The case will be closed and Kamara will have 90 days to complete all conditions. A status check has been scheduled for October 12th at 9:30 a.m. to ensure that those conditions are met. So you might be wondering, why on earth was Alvin Kamara let off so easily? You're talking about a man that has made $32 million throughout his career. Drew Davenport on Twitter tells us why Alvin Kamara was able to get out of this situation with essentially what seems to be a slap on the wrist. Now, Drew Davenport has been a practicing criminal defense attorney for the last 21 years. He gives really good insight whenever it comes to the legal side of the NFL, so I highly recommend you go check him out. So his thread starts by saying this. The report has surfaced from 8 News Now in Las Vegas that Kamara is pleading guilty to breach of peace and that his felony charge will be dismissed. Here's what I know. I'm a little surprised that the case has already settled this far in advance of the trial. However, as I said in a recent video on Joe Mixon, the smart move for these guys is to settle as far ahead of the season as possible. They're going to settle and not go to trial. This is a shrewd finish to this case all around for Kamara on his team. Here's what I said on Patreon on June 8th. It is unlikely that Kamara takes this case all the way to trial, especially during Saints camp, but a suspension regardless of the outcome of the criminal case seems likely. Now, at the same time, I was on record as saying that it would be difficult to settle because of the injuries, but the plea agreement reportedly involves $100,000 to the victim's medical bills, which would remove a significant obstacle to settling, which is making the victim happy/whole. It wouldn't shock me if there's a follow-up to this plea deal that involves a settlement in the civil case as well, but we shall see on that, and it isn't super relevant to his playing status. The plea deal is reportedly a no contest plea to breach of peace. So now he goes into what does no contest even mean. It simply means the defendant is not contesting the facts in the complaint and will allow the court to decide guilt or innocence based on the documents from the case. This almost always results in a guilty finding by the court. I've had judges find someone not guilty on a no contest plea, but that is pretty unusual and won't happen here. Breach of peace in Las Vegas is a misdemeanor and carries a fairly serious punishment of up to 6 months in jail. However, Kamara is unlikely to see any jail time. The one thing I've maintained all along in this case is that it wasn't a case that should go to trial, and that if Kamara could get out of this with a misdemeanor, then he should/would jump at the opportunity. That's exactly what has happened here, and his team did a great job securing that plea bargain. I checked the docket just now and see that a written plea has already been entered, so it appears that this is not a possibility, but that it has already happened. There was no access to the document itself online. So now that he got that out of the way, he goes into what could potentially happen to Alvin Kamara in the NFL. As to the NFL possible punishment, keep a few things in mind. 1, the NFL doesn't need criminal charges to suspend. 2, the personal conduct policy starts at 6 games for felonious assaultive behavior. And 3, pleading to a misdemeanor means there is no mandatory NFL punishment. Does that mean he won't be suspended? No, it means the NFL now has freedom to do what it wants. More than likely, there will still be a suspension. There is still evidence of Kamara saying some awful things on video in the aftermath. And there is still evidence on video of him participating in an attack that left someone with some serious injuries. On top of that, he is still pleading to have a role in what happened. The NFL will consider the optics here. Drew Davenport then says that he believes that the suspension could be anywhere from 4 to 6 games, 4 being the most likely, but he also mentions that Kamara's team did everything right here because 1, they got the felony dismissed. 2, they pled to a non-violent misdemeanor. 3, they compensated the victim, and 4, they did it all 2 weeks before before training camp opened. So from a lawyer's perspective, Alvin Kamara's team did an incredible job. And that's why he got away with something that was significantly less than what he potentially could have gotten. Here's Alvin Kamara's chauffeur and 3 other men who recounted the night.
It was so quick. Just me looking at him like, to me, it's just like, wow.
I'm looking at him. I'm thinking he know her. Next thing I hear is, what? I got to go now, right now. I thought this was sleeping. I connected with that jaw so hard.
So apparently there's another individual who in this case is identified as Lamons, who punched Green and knocked him back against the wall. The grand jury indictment said that Lamons hit Green in the head, neck, or upper chest, that Kamara then charged Green in order to strike and or punch him about the head, neck, chest, upper back, and or torso area. In February, video was obtained by the 8 News Now investigators of the incident. The indictment reads, while Darnell Green was on the floor of a narrow hallway, Alvin Kamara continued to strike and or punch Darnell Green with his right hand while Percy Harris joined his co-defendants by kicking and or stomping about the head, neck, and upper torso area. After briefly attempting to pull their co-defendants off of Darnell Green, Christopher Lamons re-engaged by stomping and or kicking Darnell Green about the body, and Darren Young joined in by delivering at least 1 kick and or to stomp the lower body of Darnell Green. Prosecutors also alleged the 4 men allegedly avoided capture while leaving the scene. So let me know what you guys think in the comments section down below. Do you think that the punishment for Alvin Kamara should have been more severe, or do you think it makes sense? I'd like to hear what you have to say. Aside from that, I'm your boy Mike, and I'm dropping our mic until our next upload.